Well, welcome to another edition of Carnivore Bites. I'm your host, Jeff Sherman, along with Dr. Eric Lopkin. A lot going on in the news. We just got word that the subway shooter has been apprehended. A older African-American gentleman, I won't use the term gentleman, monster, and kind of interesting, the mayor of New York City, who obviously anyone's a improvement over de Blasio, but first thing out of his mouth, not like, consoling the victim, talking yesterday, not today, talking about guns and how many guns are out there. This guy had smoke grenades. He had a hatchet. He would have killed people regardless.
Yeah, this was a horrific situation. And yeah, the liberals went to their go-to with gun control. But this was a symptom of a much bigger problem for New York. Crime in the subway since Eric Adams took office, which is only 100 days, is up 67%. On top of that, you have what is absolutely inexcusable by the mainstream media. The NYPD put out a description of the suspect, asking for help for people to send in tips if they saw him. And what does the mainstream media do? They give the description, but they leave out the fact that he's African American because they don't want to profile. Well,
No, it doesn't. It doesn't fit their narrative. If this guy was a white supremacist, it would be at least, I couldn't even imagine the coverage. And,
exactly.
And how do you give a description without saying someone's not? How do you not say African American?
Right. I mean, they gave the description of the jacket he was wearing, that he was carrying a gas mask. Guess what? You can ditch these things. Not giving the description of who the person is absolutely ridiculous. And it could not have helped the NYPD. It took them over 24 hours to find this guy. Maybe they could have caught him sooner had the description actually been circulated.
But it's all about the corrupt. It is really a corrupt media. Yeah, Trump, we'll talk about him a little later. Yeah, about fake news, it got really old. But he was right. I mean, the news, the media has lost all credibility. I mean, they're so crazy. They're so woke, and more than just the news media. We're talking about Disney as well. It boggles the mind. What is
it is
awful about saying the guy is an African American?
Right. It's just a description. It's not a judgment. It's just, this is who people saw. This is who we're looking for. But as I said, this is a symptom of a much bigger problem, because on top of this, New York actually has one of the most expansive security systems of any city in America, if not the world. Well, what happened at the 36th Street station when all this was going out? Every video camera was out. They didn't have a single camera from their security system working.
It's like, what, third world country or what?
Well, this is what happens when, one, you go after people with money and they start moving out in droves, so your tax base is down. Two, you defund the police. Well, that money's got to come from somewhere. Guess what? It's security systems.
It certainly boggles the mind, but it also goes into another narrative, and that's African Americans abandoning the Democratic ship, because they're the ones who are most impacted by, maybe not necessarily this shooting incident, but crime in the cities. I mean, when you have Al Sharpton turning on, he actually called them the limousine liberals and the Democratic elite on Scarborough's show. That says something. The motivations could be questioned. He needs to be, keep relevant so he can pay off his back taxes. But the point is, him saying that's something, Dr. Locke.
It really is. And I mean, yes, this took place in a predominantly minority neighborhood. Now, just to give you some background, the train that this took place on, this is the train when I lived in New York, I took to work every day. It took place in the Sunset Park neighborhood. Even during Giuliani's heyday, when crime was at its lowest, Sunset Park was never a great neighborhood. But it is primarily now Asian American and Hispanic. So you're talking about a very heavily minority neighborhood. You're talking about a train that brought people from all over the city heading into work. So, yeah, minorities are getting hit by this heavier than whites are because that's where the crime is taking place.
Yes, it's just I really believe that the Democrats are going to have a huge wake up call in the midterms, not just because they're going to get Trumps, but because when they look at when they do the deep dive, they're going to see people are leaving the reservation. Hispanics, a lot of it has to do with their religious affiliation, being very strong Catholics, and blacks, African Americans. I mean, how much crap can you take? You mentioned the employment numbers. Well, they're not all that great for African Americans or for women, are they?
No, they're not. We've got a lot of economic news coming out this week, but Biden keeps touting the fact that it's still a strong economy. We have record low unemployment. Well, I mean, yes, it is a strong economy if inflation doesn't, cripple everything. But when you dig into the unemployment numbers, these record low unemployment numbers are not across the board. Our listeners will remember when unemployment numbers were reported under the Trump administration, they routinely said record low unemployment for African Americans, record low unemployment for Hispanics, record low unemployment for women. Well, none of that is true right now. So these record low numbers that the Biden administration is talking about is essentially only for white males. For women, African Americans, and Hispanics, unemployment is higher than it was during the Trump administration. And these folks are seeing this. They're hearing Biden message that, oh, it's record low unemployment. And if they're unemployed, they're not seeing this. So they're leaving the party. They're like, what you're doing is obviously not good for me.
And that's actually Sharpton, who I've never been a fan of, exactly his words. African Americans are saying, you are not working for me. Your policies are screwing me over. Okay, so it's just interesting to see. But it is very interesting when you look at the inflation numbers. Inflation is, let's just say here, what is it now? It's 8.5%. With the wholesale index at 11.2%. That is unsustainable. And by the way, the Fed, Yeltsin asleep at the switch. My God, reacting way, because she's a political hack herself, but reacting way too slowly. And by the way, a recession is almost inevitable with those kinds of inflationary numbers. You have to, first of all, there's less discretionary income to spend, so people aren't going to go on that, or eat out, at the fancy restaurant, or go to a vacation or whatever. Plus, the Fed's going to have to raise interest rates. You can't have interest rates at 2% with inflation out of control. It's impossible. It's unsustainable.
Well, the Fed has already said they're going to be raising interest rates, and they expect to be raising it fairly quickly. So that when interest rates go up that fast, yes, it tends to trigger a recession. And I just want to take a moment and make sure our listeners understand what these numbers are. The 8.5% number is the consumer price index. This basically says in the last year, the prices that consumers are paying for everything they buy, from energy to food to rent to, all encompassing, has gone up 8.5%. The second number we mentioned was the PPI, the producer price index.
Yes.
That's up 11.2%. That's the percent over the last year that prices have gone up for companies to purchase the supplies that then they make
And
into
that's a
the
lagging
product.
indicator, not a leading indicator. That
No,
goes
no,
down the
no,
pike.
no. PPI is a leading indicator because those prices that the companies are paying eventually get passed down to the consumer.
That's my
So
point. It's a lagging because it hasn't
no,
yet. So if you
no,
look
no,
at the
no.
two, you got
No, that's a leading indicator. A lagging indicator
okay.
means it
Yeah.
happens
Yeah, I
after the
stand corrected.
point.
When I meant in the terminology of the consumer. So when you look at the two together, the 8 point whatever and the 11.2, what you're really looking at is if you had the producers index at like 5, then you could say, well, things might be getting better. This points to
Right.
higher inflation. That's what I meant by lagging, but you are correct. It's a leading.
It's a leading indicator on inflation, and it just shows things are going to be getting worse. And Democratic economists came out over the past week and they said they don't expect inflation to ease until next March.
Well, there goes the midterms, right?
That's going to blow away the midterms. And a couple of pundits were talking about this, and they said, the problems at the southern border, when it's not covered on the news, the general public doesn't pay attention to it. The war in Ukraine, if it's not covered on the news, the general public doesn't pay attention to it. But the price of gas and the price of food, there's no way for the Democrats to hide it because people see it every day of their lives. It's right in front of them, and people are not happy about it.
That is true, but you also see, not that it's a groundswell, but you do see fissures there's cracks in the media protection racket against or protecting Biden. You see it coming out because there's just too much there. Everything he has touched is a disaster, and in spite of the lapdog media, the polls are shocking. 7% believe the country is doing well. 7%, and inflation, 26% believe he's doing a good job. I'd love to meet those people. They're true brainiacs, I'm sure. And it's 31% believe he's doing a good job on immigration. But he's still I don't think he's doing anything. The people in charge are just doubling down. Maybe they feel that this is the last opportunity for a liberal/socialist land grab.
It really is ridiculous. And it's funny because it actually came out last week that some of the polls that gave Biden higher numbers were rigged because they were asking the wrong people.
Yes,
and CBS News was one of these. Basically what happens is they're just getting a cross section of America. They're asking, they're trying to ask
everyone. They're not
everyone.
asking likely voters, though.
Right. They're not asking likely voters. They're not asking potential voters. And those are the ones that are going to be coming out in the midterms. So they can give themselves a little rosier outlook, but it's not going to affect the midterms because they're not asking the people who are voting in the midterms.
Well, Dr. Lopkin, when you say when you're looking at 43% and saying that's rosy, not you. I'm talking the Biden administration and CBS and the liberal pundits. That's when you know you've reached rock bottom. And speaking of rock bottom,
these numbers are just ridiculous.
But they asked Biden if he was going to go to Ukraine like Boris Johnson, right? And he said no. They told me not to go. He said that on a number of occasions. Like, can you take questions? No, who are they? He's the president of the United States. It's like they tell him, okay, little Joey, you were a good boy. You can get some ice cream now.